It's the early summer of 1161. The mighty Latin king of Jerusalem, Baldwin III, stands as godfather to his newborn nephew of the same name. A court member asks him what present he intends to give to his godchild. The kingdom of Jerusalem, he responds with a peal of laughter. As everyone laughed at the joke at the time, they were unaware that it was the prophecy of a glorious and tragic story about the king who had to fight the invaders, his allies, and his illness in order to maintain his throne. Welcome to History Unveiled. And today, let's find out about one of the most remarkable rulers in medieval history, King Baldwin IV, the Leper King. Baldwin was born in 1166 as the younger of two children to Amalric, the Count of Jaffa, and Agnes of Courtenay. Their other child was Baldwin's 2-year-old sister, Sibylla. Baldwin's family belonged to the famous Frankish house of Anjou, which gave birth to some notable European rulers. Baldwin's uncle was Baldwin III, King of Jerusalem. His grandfather was Fulk V of Anjou, the King of Jerusalem and the Count of Anjou. Baldwin's half-first cousins, sharing the same grandfather, were Henry II, King of England, and Philip of Alsace, the Count of Flanders. When Baldwin was born, he was hardly seen to wear the crown in the future, even though his father, Amalric, was the first in line to succession to the throne in Jerusalem. Namely, Baldwin's uncle Baldwin III was still a young ruler who was expected to have his own children. However, already in his early years, fate started playing with Baldwin. When he was 2 years old, his uncle, the king, died unexpectedly, and according to some historians, under suspicious circumstances. Since he left no heirs, the Jerusalem throne was succeeded by Amalric. So now, little Baldwin became the first in the line of succession. Many would say a twist of luck, but Baldwin had to pay a great price for it. The High Court of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, something of a feudal council, strongly opposed Amalric's wife, Agnes, as their future queen, fearing the prospect of the influence and patronage she could exercise. When Amalric was presented with a choice between the crown and his wife, he chose the crown. Patriarch of Jerusalem, Amalric of Nela, annulled the marriage on account that the two were related within the prohibited degrees. Their children, however, were declared legitimate. King Amalric later married Maria Komnenia, grandniece of Byzantine Emperor Manuel I Komnenos. They had one daughter, Isabella. At the age of 2, Baldwin was left without his mother. Agnes went on to marry Hugh of Ibelin and would see her son only on public occasions when she accompanied her husband. Soon after, Baldwin's sister, Sibylla, was taken to the convent of Bethany near Jerusalem to be brought up by her aunt, the abbess. With Amalric occupied by his royal duties, Baldwin practically grew up without a family. In preparation for Baldwin's eventual role as king, Amalric appointed William of Tyre, one of the kingdom's most educated individuals, as his tutor. Before returning to Jerusalem, William spent 20 years traveling across Europe, visiting its most prominent universities and studying liberal arts and canon law. Young Baldwin couldn't have possibly opted for a better teacher, since his tutorage shaped him as a future leader. Apart from being credited for Baldwin's upbringing, William of Tyre was the first to notice the child's strange illness, of which he wrote in his Chronicles. While he was staying with me, it happened that as he was playing with some boys of noble birth who were with him, and they were pinching each other on the arms and hands with their nails, as children often do when playing together, the others cried out when they were hurt, whereas he bore it all with great patience, like one who is used to pain, although his friends did not spare him in any way. Then I began to feel uncertain in my mind, recalling the words of the wise man who said, "It is a certainty that a limb which is without feeling is not conducive to health, and that a sick man who does not feel himself to be so incurs great danger. When King Amalric was informed of this, he summoned the best Arab doctors to treat him. Ointments, poultices, herbs, and even charms were used to treat the boy. Unfortunately, Baldwin suffered from an incurable illness in medieval times, leprosy. Moreover, he developed the most unfavorable form of leprosy, lepromatous leprosy. It causes physical degeneration by attacking the body's internal organs, bones, joints, and marrow. This results in deformity and loss of feeling in the fingers and toes. Baldwin was 9 years old when this happened. Royal physicians did suspect leprosy at the time, but since there were still no visual symptoms, they hesitated to diagnose it. After all, the boy was to be a king, and a diagnosis of leprosy would definitely cast a stigma on him. In medieval times, it was generally assumed that leprosy was a divine punishment and was regarded with horror. The ill-affected were called the living dead. In the wake of their condition, they were given false funeral services, and their relatives were permitted to inherit their estates. Since leprosy was considered to be highly contagious, the lepers were isolated from healthy people. They had to wear bandages to cover their sores and carry a bell to warn people they were coming. Because lepers weren't allowed inside churches, some medieval churches had the so-called leper squints, holes through which unclean people could view services. In the Kingdom of Jerusalem, there was a leper knight order, the Order of Saint Lazarus of Jerusalem, also known as the Leper Brothers of Jerusalem, or simply as Lazarus, was founded by Crusaders in the early 12th century. The order included knights who had contracted leprosy and fought until they could no longer do so. Besides, the order was in charge of several leper hospitals in the kingdom. If young Baldwin's leprosy had been confirmed the first time he showed signs of it, he would have joined the order. Succeeding the throne would be impossible, something Amalric couldn't afford. That is, until he found a suitable replacement in the form of a potential son-in-law. The years passed, and Baldwin's condition deteriorated. Nevertheless, his upbringing was given the same attention as if he was healthy. The boy was taught government and chivalry as well. Baldwin himself did his best to make up for his disabilities. Since he had no feeling in one hand and had to use the other to carry a weapon, Baldwin mastered horse riding using his legs only. He knew he could never be the king his predecessors were, but he never wasted time self-pitying. According to William of Tyre, who knew Baldwin pretty well, he made good progress in his studies, and as time passed, he grew up full of hope and developed his natural abilities. He was a good-looking child for his age and more skilled than men who were older than himself in controlling horses and riding them at a gallop. He had an excellent memory, and he loved listening to stories. He was inclined to be thrifty, but he always remembered the good things that people had done for him and the bad things as well. He was very like his father. Not only did they look alike, but they were of similar build. Following the pattern of the previous kings of Jerusalem, King Amalric died as a young man in July 1174. As he returned from the siege of Banias, Amalric fell ill from dysentery and quickly died. Given that his sister Sibylla was not yet betrothed, Baldwin became the first candidate to inherit the throne. Candidate because even though he was not officially diagnosed with leprosy, everyone knew the late king's son was suffering from the disease. For 3 days, the High Court discussed the question of the heir to the throne. The choice was to have a leper king or to have as a king someone who was politically unsuitable. Ultimately, the High Court decided a 13-year-old Baldwin was suitable to be the king. The plan was to find a suitable husband for his sister by the time Baldwin reached 15 years of age and the age of majority. Then his brother-in-law could replace him on the throne if he was confirmed to be ill. King Baldwin IV was crowned on July 15, 1174, the 75th anniversary of the capture of Jerusalem by the First Crusade. When Baldwin IV climbed the throne, a problem occurred. Who would be the regent? The High Court initially offered the regency to one of the king's seneschals, Miles of Plancy. However, after he failed his first test of leadership, he was replaced by Baldwin's cousin, Count Raymond III of Tripoli. Raymond came to Jerusalem and claimed the regency because he was the king's closest kinsman and the richest and most powerful of all his vassals. The High Court approved his claim, so Raymond became the de facto ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The young king was considered not only underaged to deal with royal duties, but also physically incapable. At 13, it was already apparent he was suffering from leprosy. With the progression of his illness, his hands, feet, and face sustained severe injuries, so much so to cause distress among his subjects. Yet no one attempted to segregate him. On the contrary, everyone behaved as if he was not ill. Nevertheless, the High Court was concerned about Baldwin's ability to run the kingdom independently. Therefore, they prioritized finding a suitable husband for the king's sister, Sibylla. The choice fell upon William of Montferrat, also called William Longsword, from the Italian noble house of Amici, a close cousin of King Louis VII of France and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick. In 1176, Baldwin IV had come to age to take the throne. There are accounts that he offered his abdication in favor of his new brother-in-law, but the change to the throne certainly did not happen at that moment. Baldwin was aware of his disability to be a king everyone wanted, especially when a grave danger loomed over his kingdom. Mighty Sultan of Egypt and Syria, Saladin, had completely encircled the Crusader states in the Middle East. Having no time to waste, King Baldwin gathered his council and organized the invasion of Egypt. He wanted to use the opportunity to attack Saladin's land in the south, while he conducted operations in the north. For his venture, he secured the aid of the Byzantine Emperor Manuel and financial assistance from his cousin Henry II of England. In addition, another of his cousins, Philip of Flanders, arrived with troops. In yet another twist of fate that struck Baldwin during his lifetime, he was suddenly left without his potential heir. During the preparations, William Longsword fell ill from malaria during the preparations for campaign and died in June 1177. He left Sibylla pregnant. Baldwin too got infected. Even though the disease was almost undoubtedly lethal in his condition, he survived it. Due to disagreements between the Byzantines and Baldwin's vassals, the Egyptian campaign eventually failed before it even started. From there, the war came to Baldwin's doorstep. While Philip of Flanders was fighting alongside Raymond of Tripoli in Syria, Saladin marched toward Jerusalem. Going to war against such a formidable adversary as Saladin was a challenge for any king, let alone the Leper King. However, the moment was right for Baldwin to show that he was going to perform his royal duty as expected, the best he could. Given his general condition and the fact that he was still recovering from malaria, everyone expected Baldwin would appoint his new regent, Reynaud of Castilian, to handle the military affairs. Baldwin, however, decided to ride with his warriors. He issued a general summon to arms to all his vassals and marched toward the town of Ascalon. Baldwin and Reynaud had an army at their disposal several times smaller than Saladin's. Unable to confront him directly, they remained within the walls of Ascalon, leaving Saladin to march toward Jerusalem. Saladin's troops dispersed to plunder local towns and villages on their way to the kingdom's capital. It was an opportunity for Baldwin to strike. Joined by Templars, he and Reynaud set off to attack Saladin. They caught up with the invading army on November 25, 1177, at the hill of Montgisard, or Tel Jazar in Arabic. Even though Saladin's soldiers were scattered, he still had more soldiers than Franks and Templars. Nevertheless, Baldwin had the element of surprise in his favor. Before Saladin managed to arrange his troops in battle formation, Reynaud directed the main Frankish cavalry charge at the center of the Sultan's army. Saladin barely escaped death in the battle. His troops fled the battlefield in chaos. Saladin's previously scattered troops were then easily rounded up and slaughtered. The Battle of Montgisard ended as an ultimate Frankish victory. Saladin was crushed and forced to withdraw to Cairo. The Leper King, who rode along with his knights, earned great fame in the battle. He proved worthy of his title despite his drawbacks. The Leper King didn't allow himself to be carried away by glory. He was still aware of the drawbacks caused by his illness that progressed with each day. So, he wrote about it to the French king. It is not fitting that a hand so weak as mine should hold power when fear of Arab aggression daily presses upon the holy city, and when my sickness increases the enemy's daring. Baldwin's vassals, too, were mindful that the throne was uncertain. It was Raymond of Tripoli who opposed him the most. In 1180, Raymond and Baldwin's regent, Reynaud of Castilian, marched on Jerusalem to force Baldwin to accept their candidate, Baldwin of Ibelin, as his sister's new husband. A year after William Longsword died, King Baldwin started looking for a new husband for his sister. But even though he desired to abdicate, he was not keen on having terms forced on him. In the end, he arranged for his sister Sibylla to marry Guy of Lusignan. By presenting Raymond and Reynaud with a done deal and thus preventing their attempt of a coup, the Leper King showed he was good in politics as well as on the battlefield. Furthermore, he was strong enough to execute his royal powers to the maximum by forbidding Raymond of Tripoli from entering the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Instead of Reynaud, he appointed his new brother-in-law, Guy of Lusignan, as the new regent. Sultan Saladin exploited inner quarrels in the Crusader states. After the truce with Baldwin ended in 1182, Saladin attacked the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Once again, even though in bad shape, the Leper King gathered his vassals to confront the Arab invaders. In the Battle of Les Fourbalais, in dire heat, ill Baldwin commanded his troops and won a victory against the outnumbered enemy. The burden of the crown and an insidious disease were taking their toll. In 1183, he lost feeling in his arms and legs. He could not walk unsupported and was carried in a litter. His face was so disfigured that he could not blink anymore. Because of this, his cornea dried and he went blind. On top of everything, Baldwin fell ill with a life-threatening fever the same year. It was a sheer miracle that he survived it. Believing that the Leper King was nearing his end, Guy of Lusignan started to disobey him. He acted without the king's knowledge on many occasions, which displeased Baldwin. At the same time, Saladin besieged the city of Carrick. Once again, the Leper King had to show he was not a pushover. He dismissed Guy from regency, took complete control over his realm, and crowned Sibylla's 5-year-old son, Baldwin, as his co-king. He then gathered an army to confront the Sultan one more time. Blind and immobile, the Leper King personally led the march toward besieged Carrick. His charisma was so enormous that everyone responded to his call to arms, even the recently dishonored Guy of Lusignan. When Saladin heard the news of the large Frankish army approaching, he lifted the siege and withdrew to Egypt. Unfortunately, the Leper King could not survive on his charisma and devotion to the cause only. he was becoming gravely ill. In 1185, aiming to secure the throne to his nephew and having no better alternative, he appointed Raymond of Tripoli as regent. Quickly after, he developed another fever. This time, his body was so weak, he couldn't resist it. The Leper King died in May 1185 at the age of 25, leaving the kingdom the way he inherited it. Despite the expectations, he preserved the kingdom and its unity. It was achieved only thanks to his personality and incredible strength of will. The demise and the collapse of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in years after his death showed how capable a ruler he indeed was. After Baldwin's death, the throne was succeeded by his nephew, King Baldwin V. Unfortunately, the boy died not long afterwards, in 1186. His mother, Sibylla, who inherited the crown, ceded it to her husband, Guy of Lusignan. Unfit to rule, Guy could not resist another Saladin's campaign. In 1187, the army of the Franks suffered a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Hattin. The entire Crusader kingdom collapsed by the end of the year. On October 2nd, the holy city of Jerusalem surrendered to Sultan Saladin. Despite all the challenges he faced during his short lifetime, Baldwin IV was an incredible king. He endured multiple invasions, opposition from his vassals, and a debilitating disease, but still managed to lead his people effectively. They loved him, and his death was deeply mourned. For the rest of the time, their Leper King would be remembered as one of the greatest Crusader kings. Do you have any more interesting stories you'd like to hear? Tell us in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching History Unveiled.